While there are many who say it is too early to read anything into any of the Democratic primary polling, one poll in particular has captured my attention. According to this survey by Emerson, presidential candidate Andrew Yang holds the fourth place spot among California voters. That means, by the way, that he is beating fellow contender Senator Kamala Harris in her home state. Andrew Yang joins me now with his reaction to that poll, his recent debate performance, and so much more. Great to see you, sir.
Oh, it's great to see you too, Crystal. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So what's going on in California?
You know, they're catching on. The Yang Gang is growing in California. Thank you, Cali. And California, for those of you who are paying attention, you know that their early voting is going to start the same time as Iowa this year. So California is actually going to make its presence felt on Super Tuesday. I think they're tied for the fifth state to vote. Yeah,
most delegates available, so obviously very critical state there. Where else is the Yang message resonating in particular?
Well, I think a poll just came out that had us at 5% in New Hampshire, and I'm heading to New Hampshire very shortly, as you'd imagine, because you're running for president. I think this is going to be my 18th trip, I believe, but who's counting? So California, New Hampshire, heading to Iowa in a couple of days. Really, the message is catching on everywhere. Our national polling continues to rise. And after the last debate, we had over 500,000 people sign up for the Freedom Dividend, and they were all over the country. 500,000
people.
Yep.
I mean, this is what was kind of interesting to me is that, you know, the debate, a lot of the pundits said, oh, it was like, you know, it was like a game show. They didn't take it seriously. Mayor Pete sort of laughed after you did your introduction. The New York Times gave you a very low rating. But then what has the public response been?
The public response has been tremendous. I mean, if you look at the web traffic on our site, again, 500,000 signups, and we got over 1 million in donations, most of it from new donors in the 72 hours after the debate.
Oh, wow.
So this, the American people are speaking in the most important way they can, which is with their, right now, with their donations and their signups.
Yeah. What do you make of the media coverage of your campaign? I mean, something we've talked a lot about on the show, MSNBC calling you John Yang, right? Leaving your name off
Good old John Yang.
That was amazing. I mean, and it wasn't just on the graphic. The anchor said the same thing, right? I mean, you're a top contender. You're one of the few that's making all the debate stages, and yet they still don't seem to take your campaign seriously. What do you attribute that to, and do you see that shifting at all right now?
We definitely see it shifting. You know, the performance of our campaign is now indisputable. And so mainstream press, I think they're catching on, just like, frankly, our polling results continue to improve. And I will say that I've been somewhat mystified by some of the press treatment over the last number of days, but I think it's set to improve dramatically.
Yeah. Why do you think that you have been able to outperform a lot of members of Congress, governors, sitting senators? What do you think it is that people are responding to?
Well, I think Americans are very smart and they recognize the truth when they hear it. I'm talking about the real causes of Donald Trump's victory in 2016, the fact that we automated away millions of manufacturing jobs in Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Iowa. And now we're doing the same thing to millions of retail jobs, call center jobs, fast food jobs, eventually truck driving jobs, and that's going to be an epic disaster. So I have a very clear diagnosis of the problem and then a clear solution that Americans can also understand, which is a freedom dividend of $1,000 a month in our hands. And the message really for the American people is that this is possible if enough of us get together and make it happen.
Yeah. How is it possible? How do you see, say we have a Yang administration, how do you accomplish your goals if Mitch McConnell's still in control of the Senate, if the filibuster is still in place, if you have a Supreme Court that's very hard right-leaning? How do you accomplish what you want to?
Well, first, I am one of only 2 candidates in the Democratic field that 10% or more of Donald Trump voters said they would support. So if I am the Democratic nominee,
who was the other one?
We will win. You probably know, Crystal. Take a guess.
Bernie Sanders?
Bernie Sanders. So it's me and Bernie as the only 2 candidates that 10% or more of Trump voters said they would support. And what's the #1 criteria for Democratic primary voters for the nominee?
What is your message to Sanders supporters? Because I think you have a lot of folks who are backing you who maybe were Sanders supporters last time, or Bernie's their first and you're their second. Like, it seems like there's an overlap in the coalition there. What is your message to Sanders supporters for why they should get on board with the Yang Gang?
What I'd say to them is I get it, because I was a Sanders supporter in 2016. You know, I saw Bernie's message and I said, this is the right direction. I think I have a more modern approach and that I can reach some of the same goals in a more effective way. But I love Bernie supporters. I love Bernie. Bernie's a national hero that's helped move the country in the right direction.
So speaking of Senator Sanders, as you know, I sat down with him recently, and I asked him specifically about the idea of universal basic income, the freedom dividend in particular, and why he views a federal jobs guarantee as a superior way to deal with the threat of automation. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
I think most people want to work. They want to be a productive member of society. I think it's a very deeply ingrained feeling that people have. They don't want to sit on the side. Yes, of course, getting a guaranteed income is better than having nothing and sleeping out on the street, that's for sure. But I think people want to be part of our humanity, to be truthful, and how we feel good about ourselves is when we are productive members of our society. We're contributing something. And I think people feel that very strongly. And I think there is more than enough work to be done in so many areas. And our job is to say, if you are able to work, we have a job for you. Because the truth is, we have so much work to do to rebuild this country in so many ways.
What's your response to that?
Oh my gosh. Where do I start? So there are a few issues. The big one is that Bernie's presenting it as if the American people all aspire to work for the federal government, and many of us do not. That's not the vision we have for ourselves in our careers and our lives. The second thing that he misses is that if you put this money into our hands, it creates hundreds of thousands of jobs right in our communities where we live and work, work that we'd be excited about doing. The third thing is that there are all these implementation problems in real life if you were to have a federal jobs guarantee. What are the jobs? Who manages the people? What if you don't like your job? What if you're not good at your job? The spirit of it is fantastic, but the implementation would have a whole set of problems. But the biggest issue I have with this idea of a federal jobs guarantee is it ignores the sort of work that my wife does every day, who's at home with our two boys, one of whom is autistic. It ignores the kind of work that caregivers do every day, someone like Kyle Christensen, who's at home with his ailing mom in Iowa. A federal jobs guarantee does nothing for parents, nurturers, and caregivers. And to me, that's some of the most important work that any of us are doing.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. I mean, you know what I think on this issue. I've advocated for UBI. I wrote about it in my book as well.
Really good book. If you have not picked up Crystal's book, you should. It's excellent.
Thank you. This was not an attempt to plug my book, but I do appreciate that. But you know, the reality is, in America, we have had this obsession with work as life. Right? Whether it should be this way or not, people really base their self-worth on the work that they do. They center their lives around it. Men in particular, when they lose their job, it's sort of this existential crisis.
Totally.
So how do you transition from that way of thinking where we have sort of a religion of work in this country right now that's been in existence for, quite a while at this point?
No, so what we have to do is we have to broaden our definition of what work is. I couldn't agree more with you that work is central to human existence. Now, it's also clearly the case that we've gone a bit overboard here in the U.S., where Keynes decades ago projected that we'd be down to a 15-hour work week now because we'd be so productive.
How's that working out?
Instead, he was actually right about our GDP and revenue growth, but he was wrong that unfortunately we're working harder than ever. So we have to start thinking a little bit or a lot bigger about what work actually is and what's important to us. That's a big challenge, but the biggest concrete way to move us in that direction is to put down a foundation in the form of a dividend of $1,000 a month, because that would supercharge arts, creativity, culture, volunteerism, entrepreneurship. It would also help balance the scales for women and underrepresented minorities who right now the market tends to shut out. So this is a concrete step we can take to actually broaden what we think of as work.
One thing that I hear from you in your answer about the federal government, and not everybody wants to work for the federal government, do you have a skepticism around the federal government's ability to sort of implement a federal jobs guarantee in an efficient way?
I do, in large part because I saw what happened when the government put billions to work in retraining the displaced manufacturing workers in the Midwest, which again, everyone knows is excellent in theory. But when you dig into the reality on the ground, these programs were an abysmal failure for most of those workers. Almost half of the manufacturing workers that lost their jobs never worked again. And of that group, about half filed for disability. And then you saw surges in suicides and drug overdoses in those communities. So we have to be realistic about what our government is able to do and what it's going to promise to do, but then will fail to deliver on.